Good evening. It is now 6 o'clock, and I will call this special work session to order. The city clerk will note that all council members are present. Again, to those who are viewing, tonight's meeting is being conducted virtually. All of the city council members are joining us along with our staff electronically. Members of the public may watch this meeting online at burnsvillemn.gov/meetings or Comcast channel 16 or 859. If you would like to speak during the meeting, you may call 651-372-8299. You may also speak by joining us at zoom.us/join. More information is available on our meeting webpage and in the council agenda package. Discussion of the council's priorities with regards to short and long-term response to COVID-19. And now I would recognize our city manager, Melanie Lee, for the discussion and priorities with regards to our short and long-term response to COVID-19. Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. As we've all been through the last 4 to 6 weeks, there have been a lot of evolving decisions to be made with regards to our response to the COVID-19 virus and the services and operations that we oversee. As we move into discussions about recovery and thinking about what that looks like for Burnsville, I thought it would be beneficial for the council to have a facilitated discussion about what does that look like to you. Have an opportunity to talk intentionally about what your priorities are and what matters to you, so we can come to expectations on how we can move forward and meet the council's goals as we navigate through COVID-19 recovery. So with that, I've asked Deputy Manager Greg Lindberg to help facilitate a discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to Greg at this time.
Welcome.
Thanks, Melanie.
Lindberg.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, a few things before we get started tonight. We really wanted to take an opportunity where all of you could feel that you were heard in a conversation, that we hope from a staff perspective that will help us to best implement the policy decisions that you make, really with a focus, like Melanie had mentioned, on not only our response to COVID-19, but now as we kind of look to the future, really what is the recovery for the city of Burnsville in response to the virus. Finally, as we look at what we'd like to accomplish over the course of the next 90 minutes, is really to have some clarity amongst ourselves about the council's expectations and where you see us going when it comes to response and recovery to COVID-19. So what we'd like to suggest is we do that in a two-part conversation. The first part being some time just for each of you as individuals to share a little bit about what matters to you in our response and our recovery. And the second part of our conversation then being more focused on what are your expectations when it comes to our response and our ongoing work to best serve the community. So what we were hoping to do is provide each of you, and I know that you've had a chance individually to chat with the city manager about this, but each of you to share a little bit about what matters to you in terms of what's going on in our world and how we're responding to COVID-19 and the situation as it's unfolded over the course of the past 6 weeks. And then secondly, what your priorities are. And again, our goal here is for each of you to be able to listen and understand one another. And I'll be here taking copious notes too, as we kind of start to think about what are the themes of what matters to you, and really what your priorities are moving into the next short-term or even long-term future as it comes to the city's recovery. So with that, I certainly am here to answer any questions that you might have about our approach over the course of the next several minutes. Otherwise, I would turn it perhaps back to you, Madam Mayor, to share with us just a little bit about what matters to you and what your priorities are as we navigate through our response to COVID-19.
Thank you, Greg. One of the things that for me, as we look to the future, is that what is it that we agree on together? What is it that we agree on? One of the things that we have talked about often is the safety of our community. And that always comes up, whether we're in COVID or not, pre-COVID, COVID, post-COVID. It is always about the safety of our community and its well-being. When we look at our vision, we want to be bold. We want people to know that we're thriving and also that we're a welcoming community. So if we all agree in terms of where we're going, and then we also agree as to what our responsibility as the council is, and what is the responsibility of staff, and then we can move forward in that regard. I know, and I listen to my fellow colleagues on the council, and I know that all of us have difference of opinions. But there's one thing that I do know is that we all have perhaps the same values with regard to how we listen to each other and how we also address the future of the community. And things are changing, and we're always going to be looking at all of that. So my hope is that we find areas that we agree on, and areas that we understand our role and the role of the city manager and staff. So for me, those are the opening statements that I have with regard to moving forward.
So, Madam Mayor, I'm hearing you say that safety is of the utmost importance, right? That nothing about that commitment has changed in your mind, and that it's important from your perspective for the council to agree on direction, and find some commonality in the values when it comes to making those decisions and providing that policy direction. Is that fair?
Yeah. That's pretty much on a larger level. That's our responsibility as a council, is always to look to the future. We know where we have been, we know what we're in now, and what is the future going to look like? And do we agree on the principles and the values that will guide the decisions that staff will make to deliver services to the people that we have been elected to serve?
Thanks, Madam Mayor, and forgive my lack of pattern, but I'm just using how my screen tiles are organized in and amongst council members. So with that, Councilmember Gustafson, you're the next on my screen.
Well, thank you.
What matters to you and what are your priorities?
A lot of what the mayor had to say, the health and safety of our city is probably paramount in my mind. I want us to get to a point where people in our city, people come to our city, will feel safe here, feel safe to go out. We know we're all working toward trying to open up our society again. And we know that it's going to take some time. We're going to have testing, to have a full open for all the way up through, big conferences and conventions. We may have to have a vaccine, I'm pretty sure. That'd be the responsible thing to do. But how do we make life a little more bearable for our residents, giving them a chance to get out? We have to, in my mind, we have to keep up our core services. And that's working on our streets, sewer, water, doing safety inspections, just ensuring that people are okay and letting them know that we're actually working on this. I look at the guidelines the CDC gives us. I look at the guidelines our governor is giving us. I think he's doing a pretty good job of trying to figure out how to cope with all this right now. And I feel passionate about the safety of our residents. I'm a little more calmer this week than I was last week, and I kind of blew up, and I handled that probably not as good as I should have. I still disagree with not closing the playgrounds, but I do apologize to my council for kind of going off. That we're not going to get anywhere having that kind of rhetoric going on. We need to work together. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Gustafson. Really appreciate that. Hearing you say again a commitment to safety in those core functions, then really figuring out how do we return life to some new sense of normal when it comes to the city's response and the service that we're providing to the community. Thank you. Councilmember Keeley, you're the next on my screen.
Testing.
You're there.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. Well, I'm going to open up by giving some love back to my fellow council member who I've known for about 15 or 16 years or more. The way I handled that situation was not my best. And I want to sincerely apologize to you, Mr. Gustafson, my good friend, and the rest of the council and our city manager and staff for how I responded unprofessionally. So my apologies. You know, the thing that has frustrated me about this whole situation is it sort of got thrown on us. It got thrown on everybody. And it created a vacuum of power that the governor has, and he is passing down executive orders that are controlling and overriding everything we do, or many of the things we do, not everything, and that's made it very difficult. I've always believed that this was not a binary decision, that it isn't, you know, we have to protect lives, but we also have to protect our livelihood. And our livelihood is threatened the longer that we stay in this shelter in place, closed businesses. So the longer we're in that position, the more pressure builds. It's like, I kind of liken it to a little pressure cooker, and the heat is constant. And we know that we're doing the right thing. We're doing what we're supposed to do. And we have been for several weeks now, or a few weeks. And, but the longer that it goes, the more that balance starts to become out of balance with protecting our livelihoods. And it threatens a lot of things. Reading stories and looking at charts and learning more data. It seems like every day or two, we're exposed to more information about the number of people infected and how it's being spread. And you know, when we try and find that balance of trying to protect every life possible, that certainly would indicate that we would need to shut everything down, like shut the grocery stores down, and everything would have to go to curbside pickup. So the Instacart shoppers inside the store would have a booming business in grocery if everything was order online and pick up at the curb. But we haven't, and that taught us some things as well. And so it's a struggle, and it's not one that any of us wanted or asked for or prefer to have, but it is a healthy debate. And I believe that for me, you know, I value the quality of life that a city can provide as a reprieve to some degree. I look at our parks, and it's a reprieve from the dark locked doors that exist pretty much everywhere else a person can do to go recreate. And our parks are, I think they're it. I think they're the best medicine that society and our communities have right now, is the ability to go out and walk on a trail, and in this case, still utilize some playground equipment. Totally understand there's risks with everything. There's risks when you go to the grocery store. So it's the balance, right? How do you balance, and how do you say shut this but not that? And so bringing that whole thing back around to our community, I want to make sure that we continue to preserve the one thing that our residents have that they can turn to give them some sense of a balance and some a dose of something that can keep their mental health in good shape, right? I mean, exercise and getting outside and getting fresh air and all that is very important at this time. At the same time, I think as we have these discussions around the governor, what the governor's now talking about, and many of them are talking about having looking at what other ways can we open up our ball fields and athletic complexes, what athletic activities could in fact operate under different circumstances, social separation circumstances. And so, tennis and pickleball seem to be working okay as long as the courts are separated. Maybe there's a way to find some way to work with our athletic organizations to find a way that we can see maybe soccer. When you have this massive wide open field, you have space, right? Social distancing is very easy when you're all spread out over a large ball field or a soccer field at a park. So what changes in how the game is played can support that social distancing and still allow them to get out and compete. So quality of life in our parks and in our fields and our ball fields and soccer fields and that kind of stuff. I think cities are the healthy medicine that can be provided to people where virtually everything else is shut down. I don't know where else you can go to get any kind of respite from the stress and pressure of whether it's sitting at home, homeschooling your children, or maybe working from home and homeschooling your children and try to deal with the fact that this is going on and there's a lot of uncertainty. A lot of people are still sitting at home trying to get help from unemployment. Every single self-employed, independent contractor, single owner, LLC, sole proprietor, they haven't gotten a dime of unemployment. So this has been a big stress for them. They're still waiting on it from the state of Minnesota, which has said that they'll probably have it by the end of the month. That means they've gone more than a month, 5 weeks with no income. That's a stress in itself on a family budget. So there's so much out there that is pressure, stress, negative, abnormal, just most of it's just abnormal, right? I believe that we as a city have to focus on being more of the medicine to get people through it. So that's kind of my big priority. And I think there's my comment earlier about maybe we should just shut everything down and make it all curbside pickup. I think let's flip that around the other way. Maybe we should be advocating for more stores being open where everything is curbside pickup, like some of the stores that we have heard about that wanted to reopen, the tobacco store, he or she could take orders over the phone and just like the restaurants are doing, and then run your order out to your car and do your credit card and take it back in and bring your receipt back out. That's what I've experienced at all the restaurants I've gone to get food. So if food can be done that way, why can't merchandise be done that way? So I think there's a lot of opportunities to influence the decisions at the top. We don't have any control over that, clearly. But we can certainly be an advocate for common sense approaches to how some businesses can get back open. And I think what the takeout orders or examples out there are doing could be applied to a lot of businesses. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Keeley. Really, what I heard you say, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong, is that there's an element of balance here, a balance between physical health, people's lives, and our commitment to the business community and people's livelihoods, and that balance needs to be taken into account. That really our approach to this is to maintain the legislative priority that you all have of local control, but realizing that might not be the environment we find ourselves in. Take a common sense approach to our community and the decisions that are being made. And that really this is a quality of life issue, that quality of life becomes very important in the decisions that we're making, and ultimately the operational decisions that get made at a staff level. Thanks for sharing.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Workman, you're next on my screen, sir.
Looks like I'm in the principal's office right now.
Sorry about that. That's not the intention.
I'm just joking. Councilmember Keeley took my keyword and borrowed it. Quality of life has been kind of my main priority and concern throughout this process since it started. None of us have been here before or done this as a population, and so it has been a struggle because there's not a firm template to work from. So I truly believe that everyone on this Zoom meeting is acting from the best possible place in their heart, and I really truly believe that we're all trying to accomplish what we think is best for this community. What matters most to me, quality of life, mental health, balance. We're seeing a surge of suicide rates, mental health crisis calls. People are not handling this well. It's very scary. So my priorities throughout this has been to try to find ways to give some type of relief to this. Personally, I've tried to minimize how much TV I watch because it's a lot. So we're outside a lot. One thing I've said before, and I'll say again, is I was so proud of the tennis court solution because it worked in a way that wasn't an open or close yes or no manner. It was finding a way to provide that amenity to the public in a safe and responsible way. And I feel like there's an opportunity to expand upon that in other areas that we work on in the future. I don't know if we're going to get into the weeds more about playgrounds specifically or not. Some of the points I had written down were related to the CDC guidelines that guided this discussion essentially, and some questions that had come up as part of that. And Greg, I don't know if you want me to get into that now or just kind of leave it at a surface level, or
This is your time, Vince, to share what matters to you and what your priorities are. So if it fits in that bucket, go for it.
Thank you. Part of those CDC guidelines, it was a list, and some of the other items on that list pertained to social distancing in our parks and our public areas. And it does say that you must maintain at least 6 feet of distance from others at all times. And so my concern with the playgrounds is if we're going to implement that specific guideline, it would seem logical that we look at all of them on that list. And are we prepared to get into the weeds on the possibility of closing our parks as a whole, our trails, or any other public space where that 6 foot distancing is not possible at all times? I'm not asking for an answer to this question. These are just kind of things I've been thinking about as we've been going through this. Specific notes have been taken about the playgrounds being non-porous and the life, what's the word I'm looking for? How long the virus can survive on those non-porous surfaces. Are we prepared to discuss other non-porous surfaces like benches and picnic tables, hand railings, and other areas where this virus can survive in our public parks? And either remove or close those things as well as playgrounds. The last thing I'll mention, I don't want to take up too much time on this, is our police and fire. We are all hearing how scarce our PPE is. I think it's getting better. Should the playgrounds be closed, my assumption then is that we'll have an increase in calls to our police and fire to enforce those closures. And will our first responders and police be needing to use PPE to simply tell someone to go home? I worry about that because they're out there every day, and they're very important to a community. So with that, I'll leave it there, and if we continue this dialogue, I'll be happy to participate as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Workman. as I summarize and reflect on what you just said, really a focus on quality of life, really following Councilmember Keeley in some of those comments, but also that recognition of balance being important, and that this conversation and our recovery as a city and community really needs to take into account the mental health aspects of what's happening, and that we're following appropriate guidelines and we're asking ourselves the right questions when it comes to making decisions at a policy level, and I think I heard you also say at an operational level. Thanks, Councilmember. Councilmember Schultz, I'm sorry, certainly last but definitely not least on my screen.
There we go. Okay. So my values and what I'm looking for going forward is looking at a balance of lives, our safety issues, livelihoods, but also liberties. And I think we have to keep all three things in the foremost of our mind when we're making a decision and using a more holistic approach to this. I also think we're going to have to take a longer term view on our decisions. We've been in crisis mode, but now we're getting to a different step. The governor is saying that it will be 18 more months, that this will impact how businesses operate, impact how our citizens can interact with one another, and also impact people's abilities to work and get income. 18 months. I am hopeful that a vaccine is created, but there has never, by anyone, have created a successful vaccine for coronavirus of any flavor. And trust me, researchers really want to, because there's SARS, there's MERS, all of that out there. So they've been striving to make a successful vaccine. So I am hopeful, because we have brilliant people out there, very motivated and working on this. But I'm not going to pin my actions on that. And so I think to myself, I need to make decisions on that longer term, in a balance. And what does that look like to us? And when we talk about people's livelihoods, their income, I mean, that isn't about profits. That's about food lines in the Twin Cities are snaking out for miles. That's happening. RY, who gave out free lunches, and we're going to serve them for 2 hours, ran out in 45 minutes and turned people away. Yeah, we do have people who are independent contractors, and yeah, they've gone 5-6 weeks without a paycheck, and they're going to go probably another month. These aren't wealthy people. A lot of these independent contractors, they're hairstylists and jobs like that. So, when I'm thinking about people's livelihoods, I'm thinking about their ability to be able to buy food and keep a roof over their head. So I'm trying to balance that. And when we look at balancing liberties, if we're going to take actions or discuss taking actions that are even further than what the governor has asked us to do, for me, there has to be an overwhelming reason to do so. There's a lot that's happening as far as civil liberties that on a city level we can address because of the executive orders. That's above our pay grade. But there are things within the city that we can address and need to look at. And I think those are important too. You know, I'm concerned about the service disruptions. We have kids that have special needs in our schools and in our families, and they have needs that aren't being met. And it's not that everyone isn't trying to meet them. It's because, you know, the schools are shut down and all these services are shut down. And so I have a real concern about that. I'm concerned about our vulnerable populations and how this impacts them and how it's impacting them disproportionately. You know, as we go through this, and I balance safety, and we have to keep safety in mind. We absolutely have to. But we also have to realize during this next period of time when we're balancing safety with these other issues, we cannot stamp out this virus. It's going to simmer, right? It's going to keep kind of simmering. It's going to go up and down. We're going to have kind of that sine wave. We don't want it to boil. We don't want it to overwhelm. But it's going to be on a simmer, and it is. And so I think residents are asking, when is this all going to end? You know, one way or another, when is this going to end? And I don't think that's the right question to ask. And I don't think that's the right question for us as city council members to be asking, you know, open or closed, or, you know, when's it going to end, or, you know, even what the next normal is. I think the question is, how do we continue? And that's what I'm looking for. How do we continue?
Thank you, Councilmember Schultz. I like that question. How do we continue? That makes a lot of sense. Hearing again, balance is important to you, Councilmember. That a holistic approach is really the most appropriate way to move forward into recovery. That we have to take a longer term view, and that equity in our decision making and for our community is of the utmost importance. Well, thank you all for sharing your thoughts. Like we had mentioned at the front end of the conversation, it was our hope that you all could have a chance to share what matters to you, what your priorities are in terms of not only our response, but moving into our recovery. Now, the second half of the conversation I'd like to open up, if it's agreeable to the group, is some time for you all to talk about what you've just heard. And based on what you've just heard, what are your expectations? Specifically, what are your expectations of one another? And what are your expectations more broadly from a policy perspective as decisions are made to produce the best results for the community, and what your expectations are for staff as well? We'll certainly take cues from the conversations there. As I've jotted down a fury of notes, I only wish you could see the card table that I have set up as my makeshift home office, because there's stuff all over the place. But I really heard three things in the collective conversation here. That safety is of paramount importance to all of you. That quality of life, and I think that you all define that somewhat differently, but I'm going to editorialize or suggest that quality of life as a theme is important to the group. And as I listen to you, it's interesting because a lot of what you talked about in terms of quality of life really gets right back to the vision that you all recently established. Burnsville is a vibrant city, boldly leading, welcoming to all, whether it be equity from Councilmember Schultz's perspective, or hearing from Councilmember Keeley about thinking differently about our response and how we promote our response. Vibrant city, boldly leading, welcoming to all. Really, that reminded me of the vision that you all had established. And then the last theme that I was hearing is balance. That at the end of the day, this is a health and safety issue, and safety has been one of your guiding principles, is now and has been one of your guiding principles for a long period of time. But really, this is an issue where we need to balance health and safety with the business and the economics of the situation at hand, right? And that leads into well-being and some of the issues of mental health and the other priorities that you all have discussed. So really, those issues of safety, quality of life, and balance really resonated with me anyway. But with that, I'll stop rambling and turn the conversation back to you. As you've heard from each other, what are the expectations that you have as we move forward into recovery and response in that longer term view that we've talked about being important? And you can also disagree with my editorializing and theming as well. That might be helpful.
Well, since everyone is so silent, as I listen to everyone, there are more things that we agree on. And we are in this place that we've never experienced before. And it is a place that we are all trying to understand how we would move forward. The thing is, as Kara spoke to, and we've heard this from all of the medical and scientists, that it takes a while. We knew that it takes a while to create a vaccine. So the thing is, that's a task that we have the professionals working on. But what is it that we have control over in our community? And I believe that what we do have control over is to stick to our vision and to understand that we are going to continue to focus on making sure that Burnsville is a vibrant community, that we are boldly leading and we are welcoming to all. And what that means covers everything that I've heard from everybody, which is we need to make sure that the safety of our people is at paramount, their health and their well-being. And that addresses the quality of life. And at the same time, it's important, which addresses the quality of life, the economics. We all need our jobs and our businesses need to function. How we do that as we move forward, we can only do it with the guidance that comes from the people who know best what's happening and how to open up the economy in a thoughtful way so that we address the safety, health, and well-being of everybody as we open up our economics. And that gets at the quality of life. And I think that's where the challenge and the pressure points are, is how do we open up? And I think then we go back to the safety and the well-being and the quality of life. And I think we can only look to the professionals who are studying this and helping us. But what do we do with regard to our people? How do we tell them that they are continuously thought of, and we want them to know that we're here to be there with them, to understand, to be empathetic, and to make sure that they are safe, that they also have the opportunity to be to have recreation. And that's one of the things that we hear. And from the very beginning, I have always said that it's important for us to have, our health and mental health, our physical health and our mental health addressed, because it's important for all of us. So how do we do that in a way that we also make sure that our children are protected, our children are safe, our children are fed, as well as our seniors? And that's that welcoming piece. How do we take care of our people? So I see and hear a lot of things in common that we believe in. And I think the one thing that I want to make sure is that we also understand that we have a very, very competent, professional staff that is very thoughtful, and are working to make good decisions in delivering service to our citizens and to make sure that what we talk about, they execute in a thoughtful and caring way. And I see that happening. So I think one of the things is I'd like to see us all agree that we do have a group of people that we have hired. We have a city manager who leads that team. And, if we all agree that they're competent, they're professional, they're thoughtful, and they make good decisions on a tactical level, because ours is a level that is governing, and theirs is tactical. So I think also understanding that we should trust the decisions they make for the good of the community. And we can always step in. They're always talking to us about how they make their decisions. And if we agree with those principles and values that they work from, then that's good. But if we disagree, then we should speak up at that time. And then tactically, they address those.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Other thoughts, Council, on expectations? Where you want to see us go as we think about putting into practice what you talked about, what matters to you and your priorities as it comes to our response and our recovery as we look at COVID.
Greg, I'll go next. I agree with a lot of things our mayor has said there. I agree with a lot of things everybody has said about what their thoughts are and the balance in that. I'm not sure how we get there yet, but we need to make thoughtful decisions based on the current information we have, which, as Dan says, changes just about every day. And so we have to be willing to pivot when the time comes to pivot in different areas. I believe what I said earlier is we really need to treat our citizens with just a special kindness. And I'm not saying we don't now, because we have a well-trained public safety. They know how to deal with the public, but all of us need to keep in mind that there's a lot of people that are really scared out there, and there's a lot of people that are really hurting out there, and they may come off a little sideways once in a while, and it happens. But just take a breath and think about how you're going to respond to people. And it's the knee-jerk is never the right way to respond. I know that from experience. But going forward, in my mind, we need to make decisions based on good, solid information we have from the experts out there, and every day. And we do have to plan for the future, and we do have to plan for when certain businesses may open up again, and we have to plan for someday the AIM Center may open up again. When that is, I don't see it anytime real close in the future, but it's going to be steps at a time, and it's going to be in phases. And I think the biggest thing for us and for actually the public is we get anxious, but we all got to show some patience. This takes time. We're not all going back to work tomorrow. And quite frankly, I don't truly believe if they just opened it up tomorrow that everybody would go back out anyways. There's a lot of people who are really nervous about it, especially when you talk to your seniors. I have a lot of seniors in my neighborhood, and they're sticking pretty close to home these days, and I don't blame them. They're doing just that. So it's thoughtfulness. It's part of what I would like to see, though, as we move forward. If there are changes in how we're attacking things, to be kind of let the council be aware that these are some of the changes we're going to make this week, so we know what's going on. So if people do talk to us about it, we can talk with them about it. Melanie, you do a really good job on communication. I get lots of updates from you all the time, and I do appreciate that, and it's very, very important. Again, I'll go back to we can work together in a calm way, and we're not going to agree on everything, and I get that. But we can make some good policies here, and I'm fully know that our staff is very capable of executing any policies that we end up coming up with. I've watched them do that since 2004. They've always done that, and I don't see where it would change now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gustafson. Other thoughts on expectations?
Greg, I can speak to a little bit about some expectations. I don't know that we've ever disagreed that we don't have a stellar staff and that we don't trust staff. I think we've always agreed that we've got a top-notch staff and that we've always trusted our staff. That's never something that we've disagreed upon. And I would echo Councilmember Gustafson's statements that we should not make knee-jerk reactions, that we should be making decisions based on information, and we should show some patience, because what's maybe correct today could be incorrect tomorrow, because we are walking through the woods with a blindfold on right now. My expectations, and I'll just kind of reiterate what I spoke to earlier, would be ongoing communication with council from staff when significant decisions are going to be made, and I believe that we have gotten that to this point, and that we find wiggle room and ways to operate in a way that aren't open, close, yes, no, and binary, that we find creative problem solving as our main priority, as we always have, I feel. I don't think this case is, well, it is different. I was going to say I don't think this case is much different, but it is different. But I think some of the best decisions have been made outside of the conventional. And I would expect that we can find solutions that are amicable to all of our citizens. So with that, I'll mute and continue to listen.
Thank you, Councilmember Workman. Other expectations, folks?
I'd like to add, I think we need to err on the side of flexible and open-mindedness when it comes to trying to enforce the governor's executive order. I've read some examples recently that confused the heck out of me. I'm not even sure how, unless there was an expert on hand who actually could, well, if City Attorney Jamnick was able to be there on site when we are visiting and educating and asking for volunteer compliance to the governor's executive order, if there can be a legal interpretation under the executive order that a given business might be included or excluded. There's a lot out there that's not so easy. I know my wife's clothing store, that's an easy one. That's a close. But the recent situation with the bubble car wash, not so easy. I've read information that appears to me like they should have been allowed to stay open. And so we have an interpretation problem along with all of these confusing directions. And so I would prefer that we make sure that we do just educate and walk away and not, make anyone feel like they're forced to be closed. And if they feel they are rightfully able to stay open, then maybe what's the process for them to be able to make that case? I don't know what that is. Joel, you'll just have to go on ride-alongs or meet them wherever when there's a call, and then you can look it over and assess it. Then you can give some guidance. I don't know, because it is more technical than I thought it was, and it's I'd rather that we sort of leave it alone, or at least educate and ask for voluntary compliance based on the way we interpret it, and let it be. And there's probably going to be more of those. I'm afraid there's going to be a lot more of those, because the level of frustration by a lot of business owners is as I mentioned, my boiling pot with the lid. It's going to boil over, and it's going to challenge us. And I don't want to. I'd hate to see that, our incredibly talented men and women in blue, under the leadership of Captain Schwartz, Chief Schwartz, sorry, that was an old flashback there. Be caught up in some bad press on whether this was allowed or this was not allowed. That's, I think, to our discussion last time. Let's try and stay out of that, and because I think the signs from the various, from DEED, from the governor, the state chamber, the various chambers, everybody's working on the word recovery and reopen. And so at this point, I think the best advice is let's really keep an arm's length to any sort of strong enforcement. Let it be a little bit more flexible and free flowing and allow, because we're probably on the cusp of many businesses being allowed to reopen. And that in itself is going to be another challenge, because as soon as, the dam gets a hole and then another hole, then everybody's going to want it, right? So it's going to exacerbate an existing problem. So I don't want the existing problem to even exist. Let's put it that way, if we can help it. And there's a lot coming when it comes to enforcing as those executive orders start to loosen up. And unfortunately, they're just not all as easy as golf course open, golf course closed, then golf course open, right? Lawn service closed, lawn service open. Those are kind of black and white. There's a lot of businesses out there that are hard to describe, and you can't say it that way. And the governor's probably not going to line item every single different variant of different type of business each time he does an executive order. And so we're getting, I just don't want to get into that interpretation. I don't want to see our law enforcement, quite frankly, I don't want to see staff of any kind in that position if we can help it. So Minnesota nice, I think, should prevail right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Keeley. Kind of the second time the idea of being kind has come up as we talk about expectations. That's interesting. Other thoughts about expectations? So some themes I heard in the expectation discussion centered around communicating well, seeking clarity. And I would suggest that as we think about our recovery from COVID, that's not only with the community, but it's also in and amongst the council and between the council and staff. And I think that plays to kind of the trust conversation that I heard a couple of you mention. Really what stood out to me was being kind in our approach. I don't know that I had thought about that coming into this conversation, but I think both when we've talked about what matters to folks and what your priorities are, and as we've talked about expectations, that seems to resonate and help to define some of the conversation. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm also hearing a lot of conversation that again ties back to our vision. That we really expect that we're going to focus on the vision that you all have created to drive the conversation for you all to make policy decisions, but then also from a staff perspective, it's really our role. Melanie and I were having this conversation today to carry the bucket, right? And to implement the decisions in the policy direction that you're giving us in the most meaningful and productive way on behalf of the community and on behalf of the elected body. So again, when we think about expectations, I'm hearing communication, I'm hearing a focus on our vision, and I'm hearing being kind. And I think that being kind kind of plays into the conversation about balance and the realities of health and safety and business and the economy. I also think it plays into how we treat each other, the trust that we have. One thing that I've learned about this group is that elected officials do trust staff to make good quality professional recommendations and implement direction. and I'm hearing that from you tonight. Am I missing anything as we talk about those expectations? I have a list probably of 20 things based on your expectations conversations that I'm trying to boil down to the core. But am I missing anything, folks?
Greg, I would just maybe reiterate adaptability. Is that a word? Adaptability?
I think that's a word, yes.
All right. Quick on our feet, able to adjust and move with the tide as it comes. Kind of goes back to my earlier statements about thinking creative problem solving and not binary. But just wanted to make sure that that was called. So,
yep.
Thank
Well,
you.
I think that plays into the conversation about being thoughtful in our decision making. I heard that both from Councilmember Gustafson and Councilmember Keeley, I think specifically, and if I'm missing others of you, I know that it came up in conversations. I think that plays nicely to that as well.
Yeah.
I think we have all, since being in this season of COVID, have all learned to be flexible. We've all learned to be nimble and all learned to pivot as we make decisions, as new information come in. And at the same time, really making sure that we take care of the community and make good decisions from a place of principle and a place of values. So, and I think this conversation reminds us of what we agree on and what is good for our community and what is good for our relationship as the governing body and with the staff who executes the tactical services to serve the members of our community. So I really do want to thank my council members and also our staff, Melanie and the leadership team, who work tirelessly to make sure that they execute those decisions on an ongoing basis. And we're all learning to be nimble and flexible and learning to pivot and looking at the information before us and make good decisions from there.
Mayor, I appreciate that. That put a much better bow on it than I did, that's for sure. But really, the umbrella that we're talking about all of this is our vision. Yeah. And if we just had a couple of more weeks before COVID-19 changed our world, you all would have been having conversation about what your values are and what are those shared commitments that you have. And I think that is a really important conversation for us to continue, especially as we recognize that we're going to be building a response to COVID-19 for some time. So maybe those expectations are slightly revised, that really the whole conversation is kind of covered by our vision and what our values are, yet to be determined. But our expectations really are all about how we're going to communicate well, how we're going to seek clarity and provide clarity, being kind, and then the idea of being adaptable. Councilmember Workman, to your perspective, for your comment, and flexible, Mayor, to the words that you were using, in really shaping how we move forward in our response to COVID-19. With that, certainly this is your conversation. Any other comments that you have? Otherwise, I think I'll turn it back to our city manager, Melanie, if you have any insights or questions or thoughts from your perspective.
Thanks, Greg. Mayor and council, I really appreciate this conversation, and I think Greg captured it well. I hope you felt this was a good use of your time for us to think about how we're navigating through this. I think the last 4 to 6 weeks have been, to Councilmember Keeley's point, fraught with, we hear one thing in the morning and one thing in the afternoon, and we're making decisions, and there's a lot of uncertainty. So appreciate all your support as we've worked through this, and as we sort of we're moving out of, I'm going to call it crisis mode, into recovery mode. because we were supposed to have that values discussion as a follow-up to our vision. We will be scheduling that with Mike Sable. He's agreed to come back and have that discussion with us. So we can continue that on. Now that, again, we had a little bit of a bump in the road here, but looking forward to doing that with you all so we can continue to move forward and make decisions that serve the community well. So with that, I'll turn it back to the mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Greg, for facilitating this session. We do have a citizen who wishes to speak, and I will now recognize Mrs. Linda Kramer. And Mrs. Kramer, I think the host is going to bring you on.
Working on it. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify a couple of things that I heard some of the council members mention. Number one, in terms, Councilman Keeley, of the police responding to people on playgrounds. My husband made multiple rounds at different times of the day. I realize it's been a bit cold. He has seen people playing on the structures without closure signs. He has not seen any children or parents on the structures with signs that say the structure is closed. So I don't think that that's a real strong argument. Mr. Workman, I would like to know what your resource is from the CDC for saying that trails are closed. Trails are not closed. And furthermore, I think we're kind of getting lost in the weeds, if you will. I am retired. I don't have children that I'm worried about. My kids both don't live in state. But I am concerned about the children of our community. Making a decision to play tennis or pickleball, or even to sit on a bench, and you really can't compare a playground to a bench. Those are adults making those decisions. I am concerned about the children that come with their parents. And as Ms. Schultz said, maybe it is the more vulnerable population. They probably don't have the same access to information that I certainly do. They don't know that they should be sanitizing their play structures. And as Dr. Johnson mentioned, the saliva, kids put everything in their mouth. That's just normal behavior. So I think we are making a big mistake by not closing the play structures. And I can't understand why Burnsville is such an outlier compared to everybody else, including Dakota County, our surrounding communities, and then as well as the CDC recommendation. So with that, I'm going to sign off, and you'll probably be glad you're not going to hear from me again.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Kramer, for sharing your thoughts with us and from your professional perspective as well. Thank you so much. Members of the council and
I don't care.
Melanie and Greg, is there anything else that we need to discuss? Joel?
Madam Mayor and Council, I don't believe so. I think from my perspective, we got the clarity that we were looking for, and we'll be taking our notes and summarizing them and getting them back into the council's hands, and then keep your eyes open for some dates of that value discussion.
Okay, very good. And I think that would be also helpful for our community when they're looking at place structures and what's going to happen there. I think that is in your domain. And so, and you've been very creative in ways that you look at pickleball and separating all of that out. Also with our trails where they are one way, so that addresses the physical distance. And so we do have, you've made some good decisions around all of that and keeping to the physical distance and making sure that people are continuing to enjoy their physical and mental health. Okay, anything else? If there is nothing else, I will adjourn our meeting by acclamation.